What's up, booktube? It's Leah Cooper, and today I'm bringing you another monthly book recs recommendation video. So if you are not aware, I do run a Goodreads group called #monthlybookrecs, and it's to sort of fill the gap left behind by monthly book recommendations and Top 5 Wednesday. Every month I post a recommendations topic, and these topics can be really broad, like monthly recommendations, or a little bit more focused, like Top 5 Wednesday. I try to make them fall kind of in between, and then you have the rest of the month to go ahead and post a video with your recommendations of however you want to interpret the topic. So April's topic is movie adaptations, and this topic was actually suggested by another member of the group, Rhea, the Bookfinch. I'll leave a link to her channel down below. And I talked about it in the group a couple different ways this could be interpreted, and then when I sat down to make my list, I actually came up with kind of 3 separate lists of movie adaptations that I want to talk about. First of all, I want to talk about book adaptations, or first of all, I want to talk about books that have been adapted into films. Mostly. There's one exception in this category, but we're going to start there. Unfortunately, since I've read these books, I don't have them on my shelf. They're in storage because I've read them. But I'll go ahead and insert pictures as I go through the list. So coming in at number 5 is the only one that I have not seen the adaptation of, because the adaptation is new, and that is The Ghost Bride by Yang Zichu. So Netflix has recently-ish, I think it was at least in 2020, put out an adaptation of this, but the adaptation looks quite a bit different than the book. And like I said, this is the only one where I haven't actually seen the adaptation and read the book. But I'm going to talk about the book because it's been one of my best reads of 2020. It was one of the first things I read this year, and it is a historical fiction / fairy tale set in Malay, and it is about a girl whose family has fallen on kind of hard times, and a rich family in the city has offered to have her marry their dead son as a ghost bride, and she doesn't want to, but then he starts haunting her dreams, like his ghost starts haunting her dreams, and then she really does not want to. And it's got all this like stuff about the afterlife and kind of fairy tale elements, ghosts and demons, so there's this whole fantastical element that I wasn't expecting, and it has a really rich and immersive feeling historical setting. So it was a really good read. The Netflix show, I watched the trailer, and it kind of looks like they made it a contemporary story, and they also did some weird things with her dad. I'm not really sure. But the book is really good. So if you had watched the Netflix show or seen it around, it is based off of a book. The book is really good, and I highly recommend it. And then the other kind of oddball on this list is going to be a movie adaptation book, but the book is actually like a movie novelization. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. And I was really excited when I chose this topic for monthly book recs because a coworker, or former coworker at work, had been working on a movie novelization display to put up, and I had helped him with it, finding movie novelizations or show novelizations. So that's not a book that was adapted into a film, but a film that was then adapted into a book. And obviously we're all fired now and our store's closed, so that display's never going up. But the novelization I wanted to recommend is one I haven't read in a million years, but it was one I really loved as a child, and that is Hook by Terry Brooks. So this is a novelization of the film by Steven Spielberg, starring Robin Williams and Dustin Hoffman. And it's a really, really good film. Also one of my favorite childhood films. It's a sequel to Peter Pan. Peter's all grown up. Hook kidnaps his children, and he has to go back to Neverland, but unfortunately he's forgotten Neverland, and he's forgotten that he's Peter Pan. He has to relearn who he is. So this is the novelization of it. It mostly just follows the movie, but there are some like added extra things, and it's written by Terry Brooks, who's like, you know, sort of the Shannara guy. So he's a pretty talented, well-respected fantasy author. Though I say that having never read anything else by him. But I did love this. I mean, this is one of those novelizations that has, like, little images from the movie. There we go. Like, the iconic Peter and Rufio. Rufio, of course, the guy who played Rufio obviously did the voice of Zuko in the Avatar series. But anyways, I really loved this little book. You can see it's very torn up. I read it multiple times as a kid. The little pictures are falling out of it. I haven't reread it in a really long time, so it might not hold up now, but it's fun. So if you ever come across it and you're a big fan of the film, maybe pick it up. Okay, and then these last three things I'm going to rec. I've read the books and I've seen the films, and I can highly recommend both. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Cocaine Blues by the author whose name escapes me. I'll put her name down here. I don't have my physical copy of the book because it's in storage. I read this last year, and this is the first book in the Franny Fisher series. It was made into was it a BBC TV show? It might not have been BBC, but it was a television show, and it's just a like 30s era Australian mystery series. Franny Fisher is new money who grew up in the rough streets of Australia, and she is a very liberal and slightly flamboyant character, and she's returned to Australia to set up house, and she gets embroiled in a murder mystery, and she decides to kind of become this lady detective, and she's a really amazing character. The TV show is amazing. I've only read the first book in the series, but I thought it was really good. It's very, like, short, snappy mysteries with maybe a slightly campy detective that I really personally love. I also think the biggest departure from the show and the books is Dot's character. So Dot is her maid, and Dot in the show is very conservative, very religious, very meek, and she's a lot rougher around the edges in the book, which was really fun to see. I like both iterations of Dot, but yeah, it's a great book. I do suggest picking it up. I would like to read the others in the series if I ever get my hands on them. Then the next thing I wanted to talk about that I've read was another read from last year, and that is The Hours by Michael Cunningham. This is a piece of, well, it was contemporary literary fiction when it came out, but it was published in the 90s, so now it's, 90s historical fiction. And there is a film based on it, starring Meryl Streep, Julianne Moore, and can't think of. It's got a bunch of big names. It also has Ed Harris in it, John C. Reilly, some other people I'm probably forgetting. But anyway, I truly love the book. The film very much follows and hits all the beats in the book. Like, scene by scene, the movie has pretty much all the beats in it. It doesn't really deviate or change much. There's maybe one scene in the Meryl Streep timeline that got a little bit altered in the film, but for the most part, they're pretty close, and that maybe is why one of the reasons I love it. But one of the things I think that is so enriching about the book and made me appreciate the film even more is that the book shares so much more of the characters' interior lives with the readers, because we get their thoughts and their feelings, not in like a way where it drags or anything, but just in like a really interesting way. And then when you have all this like kind of deeper knowledge of the characters and what they're thinking, when you watch the movie, it's actually fascinating because there's so much in the book that's unsaid, that's just inside the characters, that's their thoughts, and it influences how they act and how they respond. But obviously that's not something that you can just put in a film because it's interior. But a lot of the actors, especially for instance Meryl Streep, did such an amazing job conveying so much of what's internalized in the book on screen, just with like the way she look, the expression she'd make, the way she'd stand. It was like, I could see, after reading the book, I rewatched the film, and I could see all of the stuff that's unsaid happening on screen fit seamlessly into it. So it's such a gorgeous book. I do love Michael Cunningham's writing. I love the story he's telling. It's about 3 women who lived at 3 different times, including Virginia Woolf, while she's working on writing Mrs. Dalloway. And then it features another woman in the 50s who is dreadfully unhappy and a closeted lesbian who's just not loving her life, and also feels extremely alienated by the fact that she's a mother. And then it has the contemporary part of the story, which takes place in the 90s, and it's about Clarissa, who is a publisher, or like an editor. Anyways, and it's following her in a single day, where she's getting ready to throw a party for a friend who is a poet who's dying of AIDS. And that is supposed to be reflective of the story of Mrs. Dalloway. So all the stories intertwine and connect, and they say a lot about women's lives in the 20th century, and it's such a powerful and moving book, and reading the book just enhances the film, and the film is gorgeous. Like, truly, truly gorgeous. So, yeah. Then the last book I want to talk about is going to be Chocolat by Joanna Harris. I think it's Joanna or Joanne. So this was also made into a film that stars Juliette Binoche and Johnny Depp. I wouldn't really call him one of the stars, but people usually put him on the cover. So Chocolat, the book, is kind of set in a indeterminate 90s again. And it is about a woman and her daughter, and they've come to this remote village in France right before Lent, and she's opened a chocolaterie, so a chocolate shop. And she comes into conflict with the local minister. I can't remember what he is. He's not like a bishop, but he's some sort of father, religious figure who runs the church in that area. And also the mayor of the town. I can't remember if he's actually the mayor. I think he is. Anyways, and so he's deeply religious, and she shakes up this like quiet, sleepy, conservative, traditional town with her outgoing, flamboyant, unapologetically herself ways. And it's about her saving several of the people in the village, including one woman who's a victim of domestic violence, and befriending some Romani who have not been treated well by the locals. And there's just all this sorts of stuff, and it's beautifully written. It's really fascinating. The film is set more in the 50s, and because it's kind of supposed to be set after World War II, so it's the 50s-ish, and it still struggles with the same themes. It still has the same conflict between her and the mayor figure. I can't remember his name. It's been a couple years since I read it, and it's been a little while since I watched it too. And she opens her chocolaterie and all this sorts of stuff. The book has no romance in it, so in the film they create a romance between one of the Romani and the protagonist. In the book, that is not a thing. The book focuses a lot more on family, and also the conflicts between like feminism and conservative religion. And so those elements are present in the film, but the book takes an even like more explicit examination of those. And so I really enjoyed the book for those reasons. And it really threw some stuff about the religion into like really stark contrast. And it's good. I think both of them are really good. Chocolat remains one of my like favorite films, and it's definitely one of my kind of favorite little books. It's also got like a hint of magical realism in it, and the film is gorgeous. If nothing else, if you just want to watch Juliette Binoche make a lot of really delicious looking chocolates. Okay, So then we're going to move on to the second part of this monthly recommendations, which is adaptations I want to read. So these are adaptations that I've seen the film. I think these are all films. So yeah, these are all ones where I've seen the film, but I haven't read the book, but I own the book, and I really want to read it. I made a list of 5, then I was looking at my shelf to grab them off my shelf, and I realized there's more that I wanted to add, so I'm going to end up talking about more than just 5. So, starting up, and these are in no particular order. So, first off, I've got Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. I recently, actually, within the last 6 months, rewatched this movie for the first time, start to finish. I'd seen parts of it, but never all of it. And I was surprised at how, good it was. I mean, it's campy, don't get me wrong, but it's held up surprisingly well for how old the book is and how old the movie is. It's still a lot of fun. Probably one of my favorite Tom Cruise performances ever. I'm not a huge fan of Anne Rice herself, but I do really want to read this book. So I'm going to get around to doing that eventually. Another thing I want to read desperately, and this is on my 20 to read in 2020, is Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. The movie is one of my favorite films. I watch it every Halloween. I know from listening to other people talk about that the book is a lot darker than the film, but I still really, really want to read this, and I'm going to get this read before the end of the year. Another one of my kind of old historical fiction favorite films is The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. I haven't watched this in a really long time, but I loved it when I was younger. And I have this, and I also have the book In the Skin of a Lion, which is the sequel or the prequel, not really sure. He obviously won, I think, a Booker for this. I'm almost positive. And I've always wanted to read it. I love the film. I think the film is astounding for the non-linear narrative. I just love it, and I really hope that is also present in the book, because that is one of the aspects about this that I love so much. So there's that. This is not on my 20 to read in 2020, but it has been on a past, I think it was on my 2018 TBR, yearly TBR, but I still have not gotten around to reading it. And another one that's kind of historical fiction is I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. There is a early aughts film starring Romalie Garai and another dude whose name I can't think of. I bought this book at Borders before Borders closed, brand new, for $14. Can you believe that? Oh my god, actually I have my Borders receipt in here. Was this part of a 2-for-1 deal? Nope. I also bought a book of Sudoku. I must have been buying that for my brother-in-law. So yeah, there's a movie, and I have watched it more than 10 years ago, but I really liked it. And I've always wanted to read the book. Okay, so quick introduction here, and sorry if this is not widescreen. I think this is my webcam in OBS filming in a really weird aspect ratio, but so I'm going to interject real quick here because I forgot to talk about this. I have literally recommended I Capture the Castle, the book, to multiple people, family friends, and talked about how good the movie is and how they should really read the book, and had people read the book and love it. One of my mother's long-term friends' husband, I recommended it to him, and he went out and bought it and is in love with it. He also just adores the movie. He's a big Bill Nighy fan. He'd never heard of it before. So I've literally got people reading and watching I Capture the Castle, and I have yet to read the book, even though I've owned it for so long. I literally bought it at a Borders before Borders went out of business. It's so weird that this book is blurbed by J.K. Rowling. I think this is considered a historical kind of young adult novel, in that it is a coming of age book, kind of written for a younger audience. It's about a girl who lives in a castle with her novelist father, and 2 men show up for some reason. I don't know if they're researchers or they're looking to invest or buy it or something. In the film, one of the guys I think was played by Mark Blucas, who's from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's been a really long time since I watched the film, but I've always wanted to read this book, as evidenced by the fact that I literally bought it new for $50. Oh my god. I can't believe I did that. Okay, then another one is going to be The Shipping News by Annie Proulx. I think that's how you say her name. Proulx? 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 Whatever. So, actually it's Annie Proulx. My bad. She's famously the author of the short story that became Brokeback Mountain, but long before she did that, she wrote The Shipping News, which is difficult to talk about now because it used to be one of my favorite films, but, well, we all know who's in it. The movie's definitely tainted now. It's about a man who has a daughter, and her loose cannon mother kills herself, and he decides to move back to Newfoundland, and he goes back to his ancestral home, and I think his aunt is living there. Judi Dench is in the film as well. She plays, I think, his aunt. And it's all about struggling with family history, and like the Quayle family is like just a piece of work, basically. I think at the beginning of the book his father might die, and that's how he meets his aunt, because she comes to retrieve the ashes, because I think she wants to take a shit on his father's ashes, because his father was a piece of work too. I think that has something to do with it. I always loved the movie because of one of the side characters. I can't think of his name. He's a kind of classic old school Canadian actor. He played the father in Due South, and I always loved his character in this movie. And I liked the kind of charming small town Canadian nature of it. So yeah, I've always really wanted to read this, but I still haven't gotten around to it. Okay, I really should probably hurry. This is taking forever. Another thing I want to read that's been made into a movie is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. So this is obviously the third book in the Southern Reach trilogy. I think the film Annihilation, which has Oscar Isaacs and Natalie Portman in it, I think it actually combines kind of all three books in the Southern Reach trilogy into a single film. That's the impression I got from one of my coworkers who has read the trilogy and seen the movie. He did not particularly like the movie, but I love the movie. It was one of the most discomforting things I have seen in years. Like, I had nightmares about it afterwards, but it's so interesting. And I do love Jeff Vandermeer. I've read Born, and I've read The Strange Bird. Can't wait to read The Dead Astronauts. Oh, so looking forward to that. So I really want to read this series from him too. I've only got the first one because I found it used. And then the last book I really want to read that was also made into a film, and I left this one for last because I actually didn't like the movie when I saw it, but I really want to read the book, and that is Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. So the BBC did an adaptation of this. It might have been a made-for-TV film. It was back in like 2006, 2007. I mean, it was well over a decade ago. And I watched it, and I did not care for it. And I don't know if the book is written from the point of Mr. Rochester. This is a prequel to Jane Eyre, and it's about Mr. Rochester's first wife, Bertha, we don't actually know if that's her real name, who he eventually like locked in the attic of his house, and who burns down his house in Jane Eyre. And the film is from the point of Mr. Rochester, and I don't actually know if the book is from the point of Mr. Rochester, but it felt very, very slightly misogynist. But I know that this is, I think, generally considered slightly more of a feminist adaptation of a classic work, because this is also, I think, deals with kind of the implied racism around Bertha Rochester and like Mr. Rochester and stuff, and it deals with like how women, for instance, could be like medicalized as a way of controlling them historically, like being diagnosed as hysteric or being diagnosed with hysteria or something and being locked away for it. So I really, really want to read this book, even though I didn't particularly care for the film. So yeah, that's the last one of that category. And then the final little section I want to talk about is just a handful of books that I've read that I think would make really good films. So I'm always hesitant about adaptations, like, of books that I've read. Not because I don't think adaptations can be good. Obviously, I've got this whole stack of stuff where I watched a movie, loved it, and it's compelled me to go buy the book. But it's more about the fact that so many films get made in a single year, and probably 75% of them are just kind of boring, and then another 25% of them are just bad, and then 25% of them are like good. And so the odds of any adaptation falling into the good category are just so slim that I'm always hesitant. But there are a couple I think would make really good films in the right hands if they were done well. So first up I'm going to mention are the Planetfall / After Atlas books by Emma Newman. Planetfall is obviously the first one in the series, and it would make for a really good, like, hard sci-fi story with a really interesting mystery. But I think After Atlas, could totally stand on its own as its own film, but also it falls so neatly into the Blade Runner genre of science fiction films that it could be absolutely stunning and so interesting and such a good murder mystery. So I would love to see either of these turned into a film. Another one I think could be very good. Actually, these next two are kind of related for similar reasons. There are similar reasons why I think they would be good. First up is going to be Ancillary Justice. This has two different plot lines going on with a singular character involved in both timelines. And one of the things in this book is that there's this ancillary in one timeline, and the ancillary, the specific piece of the ship isn't actually an ancillary during this other timeline for most of it. The ship exists in the bodies of other ancillaries. So I think if you weren't super familiar with the story, it would make a really trippy experience if it was done well, having different ancillaries who are all a piece of a singular character, the ship. I can't think of what the ship is called at this moment. Justice of Turin. It's all a piece of Justice of Turin, but they all have different actual physical faces on them because they're ancillary pieces. So I think this film, if done right, could be really trippy and really cool. And then I also think Radiance would make a really good film because, again, it's dealing with like so many multiple timelines. It is a book about genre, and it's a book about the film industry, a film industry that takes place in a completely alternate, universe, alternate timeline. Also, I think it could be really, really gorgeous because it's got this whole like alternate history, decopunk science fiction thing. Another thing that it plays with is in the cinema universe of this world, things like color and sound in films are patented and controlled. So, for instance, the Edison company has the patent on putting sound in your films. So you had to pay lots and lots of money to the Edisons to be able to record sound. And eventually, indies couldn't afford it, so they started making silent films. And then it became a vogue thing for all films to be silent. And so there's just like so much interesting stuff you could do visually. And also this is just a great twisty, windy narrative about death. And there's a mystery involved. And you get to go to all these different planets. So it could just be so cool. And then the last thing I'm going to mention that I think would make a really great, actually TV show. In the same way that we've done Agatha Christie TV shows, and it's more like made for TV movies, all with like the same actors. They did them for Hercule Poirot too, and that is Elizabeth Peters. I think Elizabeth Peters could really easily and amazingly be adapted into little mystery made for TV show. Either the Vicki Bliss novels or the Amelia Peabody novels. Either way, I think they could be a lot of fun. And I think maybe especially the Amelia Peabody ones, since they actually do take place in like Egypt and there's all this archaeology stuff in them, it would probably appeal to anyone who loves The Mummy and a good murder mystery. So yeah, that's another thing I think would be a really cool adaptation to see. All right, so those are all of the adaptations that I'm going to talk about. That was a lot of books. I think I'm losing my voice. And thanks for sticking around and watching it. Let me know down below what your favorite movie adaptation is. The light just changed. It's because one of my light bulbs overhead keeps going off and on. But yeah, let me know down below some of your favorite movie adaptations, if you've read any of these books I've talked about, if you're thinking about picking them up, if you've seen the films or not. Let me know if any of these have inspired you to pick up the film, because I think it's totally, I love films, I love movies. You can do things in films that you can't do in books. You can do things in books you can't do in films, and they're two different types of storytelling medium with different languages, and they can both be such stunningly amazing works of art in the right hands. And I really appreciate both forms of media. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why I own so many movie adaptations, why I've read so many movie adaptations, and I just love seeing that crossover. I'm definitely not of the opinion that the book is always better than the movie. I like to judge things individually based on, you know, their individual quality and whether or not they are working in the languages, their separate, you know, artistic languages. And so, yeah, this was a really fun topic. Thanks again to Rhea for suggesting it. If you are interested in participating, I will leave a link down in the description box to the Goodreads group. Be sure and tag your video or a tweet or anything that, if you do one of these recs, be sure to tag it #monthlybookrecs so that I can find it and watch your videos. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.